Well, welcome everyone to Anomalies, our next show. My name is Gwen Farrell. I am a co-host, and today I have the privilege of working with and talking with one of my favorite friends, someone I have known as a friend and colleague for many years, Rebecca Hardcastle Wright. And we have some really interesting and very important information that we want to share with everybody today. But I want to start off by telling you a little bit about her, what she's done, and then we'll get into the questions. Is that okay, Rebecca?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for
Okay.
having me, Gwen.
Oh, sure. We're really happy to have you. Okay, our guest today has over 30 years as a mind-body therapist, specializing in healing trauma, the often unconscious root of disease, to generate health and longevity. Her graduate degrees include a Master of Divinity from Boston University School of Theology and a PhD in parapsychic science from the American Institute of Holistic Theology. She is a lifelong contactee, a teacher, futurist, an author, host of the television show Exoconscious Humans, and founder of the Institute for Exoconsciousness. In Washington, D.C., she researched zero-point energy, consciousness, and the ET presence as a member of Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Quantrack International Science Team. Her books, How Exoconscious Humans Guide Our Spacefaring Future, and Exoconscious Humans, Will Free Will Survive in an Increasingly Non-Human World?, discuss how experiencers influence space science and technology, and examine the future through the intersection of artificial and psychic intelligence. Rebecca has contributed to major books and journals in the area of consciousness and contact. She's been featured in films, radio, podcast, and TV interviews, and has presented at national and international UFO, ET, spirituality, science, and culture conferences. And she offers online individual and group exoconscious coaching and co-creative intensive programs that strengthen and integrate participants' psychic experiences to advance their contributions, expertise, and leadership. Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, welcome to Anomalies.
Thank you, Gwen. It's wonderful to be with Anomalies.
We're really glad
I feel
to
right
have
at home.
Yes. So, okay. Since I mentioned that we're going to be talking about exoconsciousness today, which is primarily the work that you're doing now, I understand, I guess the best way to start is to ask you what exoconsciousness is and who are exoconscious humans?
Exoconsciousness was a word that was actually given to me. So it came from my field of consciousness. It was during the time of my kind of mid-adulthood when I was going through a lot of, I would describe it as very radical contact. So I'm a childhood contactee, which flowed very easily and nicely. And then when I went into mid-adulthood, that was a time of a lot more. I knew how to question more. And there was a lot of almost going back into my childhood contact during that time. But I was part of Ruth Hover's group in Fountain Hills. Mm-hmm. So I was, she had one of the longest running experiencer groups in the nation at that time. And that was the first time I moved to Phoenix in '92. That was the first time in my life I'd ever had a chance to meet other people that were experiencers as an adult and have them become my friends. So Ruth had this massive library. It was actually, Gwen, it was 3 books deep in this library. I'm this single mom. I'm trying to learn everything I can, plus be a good mom. And she's loaning me books and mentoring me. And during this very intense time, one morning, my I had one of those radio alarms, and the radio alarm went off, and I hit the snooze button, just kind of thought, oh, I have to sleep a few more minutes, got to get the kids to school, I have to get to work, just need a couple more minutes. And in those few seconds, my head went back on the pillow, and the word exoconsciousness came in my body. not just my head, not just my mind, not just my thoughts. I didn't think it. It came inside of me into my body.
Wow.
And which is kind of a biblical transmission sometimes. They talk about, and the word became flesh. That's kind of what happened to me. That word became flesh inside of me. And I knew at that point that was going to become my mission. That defined what I was supposed to be about going forward and in my life. And that was probably, I don't still have all my old journals. I think that was probably late 90s, early 2000s when that happened. And at that same time, Michael Salla had founded the Exopolitics Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And he and a number of people were trying to he had been let go from American University in Washington, D.C., because he was talking about Eisenhower meeting the ETs and Holloman and Edwards. And of course, that was not done. And so Michael was let go, and he started at the Exopolitics Institute. And what his goal was to become, for ufology and anyone who was an experiencer, to become more academic. So I initially he asked me to write for this journal that he was putting together. And I initially defined exoconsciousness as the study of extraterrestrial contact, extraterrestrial consciousness within humans. So our abilities, the dimensions, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So I wrote my first book on Exoconsciousness, Your 21st Century Mind, trying to lay out the foundation of what that meant academically and give it some flesh.
Mm.
And then as I moved more into my work as a therapist, I found that actually trying to get into academia was a lost cause. And so I just thought, well, I'll just let that go. And I can't tell you how many college presidents and department heads during my lifetime I've emailed to say, this is real. This is exoconsciousness. You might want to explore this, including people at my universities that I went to. And nothing, no interest whatsoever. And so I gave that up. I let that go. And I thought, it's good that I let that go, because now I define exoconsciousness as the innate. So every human has it. It's the innate ability in all humans to connect, communicate, and co-create with extraterrestrials, multidimensionals, and spiritual beings.
Okay.
And what I found in my groups was that, especially my group coaching that I'm doing, is that people were coming in with these, like your radio show, talking about anomalous experiences all the time. And sometimes they were ET, but sometimes they were multidimensional. They could have been orbs, they could have been angels. And many people were coming in with, I was communicated to by Jesus or Mary or Buddha or, a Hindu god. It was going clear across the gamut. And so I felt like we needed to be a home where people could talk about their religious contact, because I come from a religious background and there never really has been a place to do that within the institutionalized church.
So, yeah, very interesting. I think that perhaps now people or institutions, hopefully, are more open to this kind of thing and might be more interested in working with it. It seems to me that we're still sort of, we're still sort of looking at science as what we want to believe in. But at least in science, there are people who are thinking about more about consciousness and the types of consciousness there may be or what there is. So maybe we've made some progress in that area anyway. But so that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. I'll just ask now, and then we can get on back to terms about what you're doing. So you were a lifelong experiencer, and from reading your book, I understand um, that you had an understanding, or if not an understanding of what was happening, that you had an acceptance that it was not fearful experiences for you. There were things that you were able to look at and bring into your body, like you said. But when you became involved as a minister, you went to school of theology and became a minister. How was that? Was there ever a problem with you reconciling all of that experience with other beings and then into a theology, a set theology, or how did that work for you?
That's a good question. In terms, because I was a philosophical theology major, so I was trying to piece that all together. As a student, when I went to graduate school, my dad, who was very well educated, he got his doctorate at Columbia University, and he took me aside and he said, you go to that school and you find yourself a mentor, and you study with that mentor. Don't fool around with classes. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, find yourself a mentor. That's the best way to learn. And I did. I found this man who was a theologian as well as a philosopher. And for I think all of my 3 years, so divinity degrees, 3 years. So all of my 3 years I studied with him, and we studied the entire expanse from, Socrates, Plato, Western, primarily Western philosophy onto, Gadamer, Heidegger, more present day philosophy, as well as theology. So I had a very good grounding. At that point, I was just trying to learn. I was trying to get some kind of basis of knowledge for myself. And then when I became what's called a chaplain, I became a campus minister. I was an ecumenical chaplain. So at a new university in Ohio, Wright State University, and there weren't any. So I worked with the Catholics. So I was a Protestant. I worked for 9 different Protestant denominations, very ecumenical. But we didn't have a Hillel house, so I also did programming for the Jewish students and also for the Islamic students. So I actually had a lot of fun doing that. So I was very busy, yeah. just doing that work. And as a chaplain, you do a lot of therapy, you do a lot of counseling, and I was educated in that also. So I didn't, for me, it's always been about the subjective experience of what people have been going through. Yeah. And I guess you would say I lean more as a Gnostic. So a Gnostic is someone that believes that the religious experience is subjective and it's experiential, that you actually do these things that you read about in the Bible. So for example, I became a Reiki practitioner because I believed and I wanted to experience the fact that I could, heal myself, or that I could use these energies to help others heal themselves. And that I saw really none of this going on in the church at all. It was much more dogma, much more doctrine, much more scripture related, which was fine with me. I was very comfortable with that, but it became something that I quickly outgrew. I have a deep appreciation for the fact that churches exist. I don't know if we would understand love and forgiveness to the extent that we do as humans if we didn't have some kind of a Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or Christianity. And that's certainly something that's important. And so when I started my exoconscious coaching, that's a coach is very different than a therapist. So sometimes when I do my one-on-one therapy, I'm very direct. I'll just say, this is what I'm seeing. I'll draw pictures. I'll say, what your behavior is indicating, and yet this is what you're voicing this, but this is how you're behaving. Coaching is just about holding space. You just hold space for other people. You hold space for them patiently, and in a heartfelt space for them to figure it out. And that takes a long time. And I found by accident, wasn't planned, that when about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I started putting together these coaching groups, but small coaching groups of like 8 to 10 people, and they would run for 16-week sessions. And I put together a coaching manual. So I would have a list of questions, and we'd start first with, birth contact, crib contact, childhood contact, what happened to you? And people would be talking to each other about what their contact through adulthood. And we talked a lot about the soul. We talked a lot about discernment, all of these very important topics that just are never talked about anywhere. I mean, have you ever had a minister ask you about your soul? I don't think they do that. And yet we talk about that all the time in our coaching. And what I found was that the people and their spirits inside of those coaching circles had some kind of alchemical magic that they awakened each other. And they do the work, but they do the work because they're people who become their trusted colleagues in that coaching group are also doing the work.
Yeah, remarkable. It sounds almost like you came to where you are today, possibly in spite of religion or in spite of theology, even though that was a helper because it's certainly part of you, but you didn't get stuck in that.
I think theology and philosophy, philosophy for sure, it taught me how to think critically. And had I not had that background of how these different philosophers approached life and looked at life, what their different perspectives were, I don't think I would have the same abilities to critically think. And one of the things we talk about in exoconsciousness is that you integrate your experiences. So if you've had contact, you integrate it by talking about it. You share with other people. You say what you're doing. You say what happened to you. You say how it affected your life, and you make a conscious, not unconscious. You make a conscious effort then to integrate that knowledge that you have into your life. So it's integrative. The second thing is that we use a lot of critical thinking.
Oh, okay.
And we use the critical thinking a lot in discernment. So you can't discern things if you can't think critically. It's beyond you. You're just reacting. So if something comes at you, and you know about this with your work, if something comes at you, you're reacting, say in a traumatic, unconscious way, you're not critically thinking. That response, in a sense, owns you. And so we deal a lot with the critical thinking aspect of what's going on inside of us, and also what's going on with these beings that we're communicating with, and with culture at large. And then the third component is that we spend a lot of time encouraging and making space for people to be creative. And that means that sometimes they make a mess. And sometimes, we launch things that may or may not work. But that everyone in that coaching needs to be thinking about how are they creative, but creative also in terms of co-creating. So how are they using their extraterrestrial contact, their multidimensional spiritual contact to actually create and manifest things and work. So work is a big deal with us. We integrate, we think, and we work. And work is always creation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It seems as if you're going further than many other types of groups where, like, for instance, experience or support groups where people are able to share and help each other feel comfortable and learn from that. But what you're adding something more to it, and I can see the difference between coaching in that way and being a therapist or facilitating a support group, for instance, as that you are helping people to find a way. And I've always been told that my job as an experiencer therapist is to help people integrate their experiences. But how do you do that? That sounds really good. Oh yeah, I'm going to help you integrate. Like, okay, how are we going to do that? And that's always been difficult to go. It's always been a kind of a sticking point between formal therapy and then doing work with groups. So it sounds like you have found a way to do that, to make an important part of what the people are doing. And I wholeheartedly agree with it. I think that's a really good way to look at it. How long do your programs go, or do you have certain length of your coaching programs, or how do they work?
Right now, I'm doing 16-week coaching programs.
Okay.
And we meet for around 90 minutes weekly for 90 minutes. And I have some people in the groups that have been there for over a year. They absolutely do not want to leave. This is their time. And to also return some to your explanation. So I'm not a passive coach. So sometimes coaches are passive, and all they do is just sit there and listen. But I'm a very good listener. I listen attentively, but I also have a structure for the coaching. So I've come up with a process of a step by step. First 4 weeks I'll talk about this. Next 4 weeks we'll talk about this, and just kind of lead them. And I lead the discussion with questions that everybody is thinking about and everybody is sharing on the topic. So it's not just, every week isn't just a free-for-all.
Yeah.
So for example, the 2 groups I have left, most of the people been there over a year. That's a long time together, and they know each other, and they communicate outside the group. They do projects together. They trust each other. And so this week I said, okay, next week on Wednesday, so our groups meet on Thursday. Next week on Wednesday, so this Thursday, our question is, next week on Wednesday, when the Congress meets to discuss the House committee hearings on UAP, some have said that experience or information should not be included. Actually, many people are saying experience or information should not be included. It should be strictly scientific, materialistic, proven approach. And that if an experiencer information is brought forward, it will destroy the momentum and it will ruin the hearings. So I said to them, and once again, this is more of an advanced group. So I said to them, what's going to be lost when we as experiencers are omitted from the discussion with the House committee? What are we forfeiting? What are we losing? And what benefit do we as exoconscious humans bring to that discussion? So this is an action kind of question. So you've already publicly in this group for over a year talked about who you were, what your experiences are, And it's about building self-empowerment. It's about building self-value. Are you, you're a citizen of the United States and you're an experiencer. So let's talk about what that means to that congressional committee, or what you could say to your friends, or the perspective that you could bring.
Yeah.
That's just one example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and but it's something that it seems, well, all of the work that you do is practical, very practical, everything in your groups. And that definitely is because we're getting so many questions, those of us in this field now, about what's going to happen and when are things going to be disclosed and what's disclosure and who's going to be doing this and that. And I'm just constantly surprised by the reactions that I'm seeing from people in this field. But that's a good practical question to think about, and people are starting to ask that too. So yeah, so very interesting. Sounds like the coaching classes are really, really great experiences to have, and probably a lot of fun too when you're learning things.
They're so much fun, and um, people also go on retreat sometimes. For example, last week a woman went on retreat, and she had this very definitive shamanic experience while she was on this retreat. And she wanted to talk about it. She wanted to see what other people thought about it. It's a wonderful sounding board. And once again, that's integrative.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's very valuable information and as you say, very different from formal therapy or even group therapy or any kind of formal therapy. So yeah, it sounds remarkable. Sounds really good. I'd like to kind of look at some of the questions that you have here, which are really interesting. What are the differences between exoconscious humans and transhumans? And I guess maybe I would like you to tell us what a transhuman is. Sure. And then, yeah.
So transhumans are a group of primarily material science individuals who believe that human life will be enhanced through and evolve through technological extensions.
Okay.
So this technological extensions could be something like a chat GPT, or it could be something like a genetic vaccine. It could be something like CRISPR DNA inside of you. It could be an implant. It could be an artificial limb. It could be any kind of artificial body part. But that the belief is that of that group, the belief is that scientifically they believe that the human body as it is will not evolve unless it's technologically enhanced.
Okay.
Yeah. So to them, we're kind of a race of we're a failure. Pretty much so. Pretty much a failure.
Yeah.
So an exoconscious human would be of the belief of a few things. So transhumans not only want to technologically enhance the humans, but their view of consciousness is that it's all inside the brain. So it's all brain-based consciousness. Okay, so that's why like a neural link's going to go in your brain, or CRISPR technology is going to, open up the back of your neck and heal you from all mental health issues. I mean, that's one of the things that are on the table right now. There's so many, it's hard to keep track of all of it. But it's a very head-centered, it's kind of like Zuckerberg. We're going to chop your head off and store the real you in cyberspace. So it's head oriented. An exonconscious human does not believe that consciousness is just in the brain, but believes that it's an interchange between this field of consciousness that is around us and also our brain but also our body. So we would say that the human race will evolve when it learns to use the parts of its body that it's never used. So our chakra system, our meridians, the junk DNA inside of us, our psychic abilities, that's how the human race is going to evolve. And that everything, every system is intact and can be used, but we haven't used it yet. And so evolution for us is learning to use these capabilities that are naturally endowed in humans.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, and not something that I have thought about before. But when you explain it, it's very clear. We can see the difference between the transhumans. We can see what's happening, and where we feel like I think there's some philosophies and religions that teach us that we shouldn't be worrying about what's on the outside. What we need to be doing is from here, looking from within ourselves out, instead of trying to think that we're going to get happiness and we're going to grow from just pulling things into us from the outside. So I can see where your connection with those philosophies and your belief in that has perhaps shaped you in this. What about the soul? What do you think about the soul or the spirit? Just general question about that.
I feel like a person's spirit is really about frequency. It's about frequency, resonance. If it's balanced, it's about being in a harmonic relationship with God or the source or the ground of all being, whatever you want to call that. That there's a certain resonance, a spirit that allows this frequency and this energy to come into you as a human. And it's part of the gift of being human, is that you are spirit. And it's also part of the different, bodies, our emotional body, our astral body, our etheric body. Etheric body is really important in spirit. So it's even knowing these different bodies that we possess and learning how to use them. I think within that, soul is the manifestation of not only this lifetime, but of course, like you, I'm a hypnotherapist. So, looking at past lives, how this soul of mine or yours has moved through these past lives. And it's more of a journey, of an evolution. It's tied to the evolution of not just me or not just Rebecca or Gwen, but it's also tied to the evolution of all humanity. So it's a soul evolution of all humans, and it's natural, it's organic, and we all participate in it to the degree that we choose to become conscious of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
And other beings also participate in this soul journey.
Okay. I saw a question on here that made me think of a recent group, one of my support groups. We were chatting, and someone in the group was talking about the hearings that are coming up, the Schumer the hearings, and about how disclosure, and there are many people who are saying disclosure is going to take place by the end of the summer, and by September it's all going to be disclosed. And the wonderful thing about a good group is you can get people talking and having different opinions about things. And one of the experiencers, lifelong experiencers, was in the group, got us started thinking about, well, what is disclosure then? Is there a government disclosure that's going to be for public consumption, that's going to be things that we're going to see when the government's going to admit all the things that they have been denying all the years? Well, the other one has to come from somewhere else. This is from the beings who are connected with us, who have been interacting with us, has to come somewhere from a consciousness or a spirit somewhere. And until we get both of those together, And in my mind, we don't have true disclosure, like I would say with a capital D, the big D disclosure. And so one of your questions is, how does exoconscious human disclosure differ from government disclosure?
Well, it's interesting because one of the women in my group, she emailed me this week and she goes, I didn't even know that this was in your history. And so I'm like, oh yeah, kind of, reminding me of something. But so I lived in Washington, D.C. for 6 years and worked for Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And we were actually working for the disclosure that the people in your group were talking about, where we were talking about 0 point energy. So we were talking about all the hidden technology that's been going on. So we were looking for 0 point energy disclosure, consciousness disclosure, interestingly enough, and at the disclosure of the extraterrestrial presence. So it was very broad. And in 2014, I living in DC, I contacted John Podesta's office, and who was the White House counsel for Obama. And I said, Edgar Mitchell and I would like to meet with you as a first. Well, actually, we asked to meet, for clarity, we asked to meet with Obama, but we asked it through John Podesta's office and his administrative assistant, Aaron Sepp. And so I wrote the email, and lo and behold, John Podesta said, yes, I'll meet with you. And so we had this meet. Who said, I've cleared my calendar, the week of August 11th, I'll meet with you. And as life would have it, as this crazy road of disclosure would have it, Edgar had he'd just been to Switzerland. And he had a very, very hard time. He was actually in a wheelchair the entire time he was in Switzerland.
Oh, my goodness.
And his health was just precipitously declining. And he contacted me and said, I cannot come to DC. I'm not well enough to do that. And then subsequently, a year or so later, he passed away. So that was, to me, I knew that Edgar was, declining rapidly in health, and that, I'd done what I really wanted to do. And so I withdrew from that group, and I didn't really think much about it until I knew that there are a couple other women that I was working with, and they were firing off all these emails. And I don't even know if Edgar even saw the emails they sent, quite frankly. I think it was kind of one of those not so nice situations.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think anything of it. And lo and behold, 2016, I'm in bed. My phone rings. It's Victor Vigiani up in Canada. I don't know if you know Victor. He's lovely. He's really a Canadian disclosure figure, and just a wonderful man. And he called me and he goes, get out of bed right now. All of your emails to John Podesta are on WikiLeaks. And so,
oh my goodness.
was dumped into WikiLeaks at that time. And that was kind of a disclosure in and of itself when that came. And actually today I still get phone calls from people about it, because on the email, on all my emails to John's office, had my email address and my phone number. So people are still, every now and then I'll get a call. Was this real? Did this really happen? And but to me, that holistic disclosure was really what it was all about. It was about the tech. It was about the science. It was about consciousness. And it was about the fact of the extraterrestrial presence.
Yeah, so all of these little disclosures that have been happening for, our whole lifetime, and even before that, I think are all a part of this. It's very complex, and it's wonderful. I tried not to get too excited about things whenever someone like Stephen Greer has a National Press Club event like he did a few weeks ago. And with the first one he did many years ago, I saw it and I was so excited, and I thought, okay, this is it. This is it. I'm looking in the newspapers and I see nothing. And then his recent one as well. So I try not to get as excited anymore. But I do realize after all these years that I hope I understand myself and humanity a bit better. And I kind of understand how we have to do things. And when we have people like you who are teaching things that most people are not even thinking of, a different way to grow. And it's not just sitting around waiting for ETs to come knock on your bedroom door. Not that that doesn't happen and it's not valid, but and when that does happen, how do you use that? How can you take that to create, co-create with them what you want your life to be is phenomenal. It's very, very interesting and I think really groundbreaking. So a couple more questions I'd like to get to if we have time to today. When you're talking about doing your coaching, you're talking about human transformation. People are growing, people are changing, and hopefully in a positive, good direction that's going to point them where they will benefit, and maybe society as a whole will benefit from them as well. So you have a couple of questions and I think relate. One of them is, does ET multidimensional contact create psychic abilities? And then the other one is, what transformations do exoconscious humans experience?
I think whether you're the classic person that sits in the backyard and does their CE or then does their CE5 or gathers their friends and does their CE5, or you know, like a woman that I just interviewed recently, she's in our group and she was talking about one that she'd been in really stuck for a long time in a marriage and in a life situation, just mired and stuck. And I know you know about that from being, so they're frozen from being a therapist. So it's the classic freeze of trauma until, you know, this orb shows up outside of her house and everything just changes the minute this orb comes. So it wasn't, it was as an intelligent orb also.
Okay.
So, you know, whether it's a being or whether it's an orb, I think the encounter is what makes the psychic abilities within humans accelerate.
Okay.
The encounter and the integration, because you have to find a way to make sense of it, and you have to trust the parts of yourself that are psychic to make sense of that. And for example, some people go into so experiencers, you know, there's hard data of AI, there's hard data of science, and sometimes that's kind of flat and meaningless to humans. I think the exoconscious psychic piece is what gives it meaning. It's what fires up all of our inner being that can be responsive to being cosmic or galactic or in contact and co-creation with this other being. And we have to use different tools. And oftentimes those tools are psychic, but they're also an extension of our existing five senses. So my colleague, Nancy Duterte, who teaches TSP, which is remote viewing, and for your people listening, she has a great class. So what she talks about is that all of a sudden I'm hearing things. So my normal hearing range is picking up like a dog whistle. I'm hearing things that I don't normally hear. I'm seeing things, beings, energies, plasma forms that I don't usually see. I'm smelling things. I can feel a being nearby me. So it's as though we possess these five senses, but we haven't taken them to that next level of psychic abilities. And I think that another ability that emerges is very connected to critical thinking. It's that people who are contacted, or people who have a contact experience, I should say, oftentimes are pattern, their ability to think and do pattern recognition is just off the charts.
Mm.
They see things unfolding, and they recognize patterns that other people aren't seeing and aren't aware of. And I'm sure you do that in your therapy and in your coaching. And I think that's almost like a mental psychic ability that a person has.
Yeah.
That becomes enhanced because they've had contact, and all of a sudden they're not dealing with this narrow materialistic piece of life. They're dealing with, oh wow, everything just got smashed open. So you could use that old mirror analogy, that the mirror gets smashed. So I used to see myself in the mirror when it was intact. Now the mirror's smashed, and I have to use my imagination, and I have to use my psychic abilities to put it back together again, to get a view of who I am and what I'm doing and what life's about.
Mm-hmm. Does a person have to have an otherworldly or ET or spiritual experience in order to begin to see themselves as an exoconscious human?
I don't think so. I think that you could have anomalous experiences of talking to animals, or talking to plants, or healing yourself. Anything that's going to take you out of
The
the normal,
Okay.
the normal avenue of life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give a good example of plants. So Jim Delatosa is a good friend of mine. I don't, Jim.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he was making a documentary about indigenous plant ceremonies, and he had all of the film that he was editing and working on in his office years ago. And as a result of all the noises and the film editing, the plants outside his house started growing up to the roof.
Oh, no.
So he was not only having an experience with these indigenous people that he had filmed, he was having an experience with these plants that were growing up. And now he works, he helps feed 1,000 people every day at St. Vincent de Paul, and uses sound to grow the garden.
Yeah, that's amazing. Something we don't often think of is other life forms, and how they are really so similar to us, I think, in consciousness, whatever consciousness is. So I have another question I definitely want to ask before we're finished today. And that is, this was part of, I think, the title to one of your books. And that is, why are exoconscious humans fundamental and beneficial to our spacefaring future? How do they integrate with an artificial-based space program?
I think that's one of the more important questions, and I think that question is going to grow in prominence. So I wrote that book as a white paper when I lived in Washington, D.C., and I was around a lot of people that were defense contractors and in space agencies, and they didn't have UFO history. So they didn't know about, for example, the astronauts that had seen objects in space, or the different ufology history. So I was trying to like condense it into a short little book, and also add to that the fact that experiencers oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes are conscious that they are able to manipulate space and time in a different way because of their experience and because of what they're taught by the beings. So we'll just take the classic experience of, I'm here, and then I'm through this wall, and then I'm in that ship. So obviously there's some kind of ability that we exoconscious humans have experienced of our material body, and the abilities of our material body to go to certain places. Also, exoconscious humans, and I think that's necessary for space. for a
Okay.
spacefaring astronaut or whomever is going out into space. They need to know how to manage time and space differently than we do here on this 3D planet. Another example of what exoconscious humans have is that we can telepathically talk to each other and tune into each other. For example, when Edgar was coming back from his Apollo 14 flight, he was working with a psychic in Chicago, and they were doing this, this classic ESP cards with the different shapes on them. So he was doing experiments in outer space with these ESP cards and just, smack on every time. So what could you do to enhance that natural ability? So right now, the space program is being built on AI and computers, which also have a fail rate. And so when that fails, or when the grid goes down, that's one thing that preppers never really talk about. The preppers always talk about the grid goes down, so you need to get, X, Y, and Z, and this food and this generator, but they don't ever really talk about, well, you need to start to learn how to be psychic. Because there's going to be there's going to be a way that you're going to know where to go, and you're going to know where to move, and you're going to know how to navigate that, how to navigate a different reality if and when that grid goes down. So what I did in the book was I just listed, I don't know, 8 or 10 things like that humans possess, that all humans possess, but especially in space, and unless all we want to have is a robotic space program, and that's not really human.
Yeah. So,
or unless we want to have nothing but weapons in space, and that's not really human either.
And that's not really human either. So, wow, so much good information today. I definitely am going to go back to your books again and see what I can find that I missed before after having a chance to chat with you today. I don't want to keep you much longer. I do want to ask a question that we like to usually ask most of our guests, and that is, where do you think humanity is going from where we are now? Many people believe that we are being raised somehow with our spirit or with our energies. Some people think the ETs are going to come and take us away somewhere else. Where do you think we are moving as a race? I guess that's a very broad question.
That's actually a very important question, and I don't think I would do this exoconscious work unless I cared about the species and the survival of the natural human species. And so what I feel is that the future is going to have a lot of pathways in it for people. I think some people are going to go into transhumanism fully. They are going to take every implant. They're going to be a fully cyborg. They were going to live a cyborg life. I don't know if you follow the work of Steiner, Rudolf Steiner.
Yes, a bit.
Okay. Yeah, so Steiner talked a lot about these harmonic trends that are happening, and how humans will really merge and become, so the computer will become flesh and dwell within you.
Yeah,
and the thing that I don't think a lot think about is that when that happens, then that's going to define your reality. You're going to live in an artificial reality, and that's going to pull you further and further from a natural human reality. And so I think some people will do that. I think some people will develop like a hybridized idea where, I'll take this implant because I want to have a high IQ and I want to have, do really well at school or whatever, but that's all I'm going to have. So I think they'll kind of be a hybrid human. And then I think people I'm working with, and maybe you're working with too, I don't want to speak for you, but are people that are really dedicated to natural human consciousness. And I know that I am only now using such a small percent of what I could be using of my DNA, of these different emotional bodies and astral bodies that I possess, of my meridians, of my chakras, of my mind. And my desire is to want to experience them more and more fully every day. And when I do that, then that's going to put me in contact with extraterrestrials, multidimensionals, and spiritual beings. Now, are they going to save me? Are they going to come and put me in a ship and take me off? No, not necessarily, but they're certainly going to redefine my perception of reality. And I do believe, like Steiner says, the anthroposophy talks about, like movies, that the human race has been like it's Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth, and that Jupiter may be, our next stop. I find that to be quite possible, that human life on Earth may or may not survive. If natural human consciousness survives, I think it will. But if it doesn't, then I think that we're kind of in an Atlantean moment here. And many of us are Atlantean people that are coming back and doing this work. And if it's like we see the patterns in front of us.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think from what we've talked about today and what I understand about exoconsciousness is that the more we can live this and make it work for us, then the more we blossom these abilities that we have. And you talk about that co-creating and abilities to do all kinds of things in life better or in a different way, perhaps a richer way. And so that's an important thing for us to think about doing, I think, just for anyone to have a happier life and a more beneficial one. So, well, before we close, I'd like to ask you, do you have a website or an email address that you want to give our viewers if they want to contact you?
Yeah, so thank you. My email is just R for Rebecca, R Hardcastle Wright @gmail.com. And my website is exoconsciousness.com. That's my primary website, exoconsciousness.com. And then I also have another WordPress site that's connected to our YouTube. So our YouTube is Exoconscious Humans.
Oh,
so if
okay.
you just go on YouTube and type in Exoconscious Humans, plural humans, you'll come up with our YouTube, and that's also the website that's connected to that YouTube. So it's exoconscioushumans.com.
Good. Pretty easy to find then, it seems like. So when are you going to be continuing with your coaching? Will you be starting a new term or a new section of classes in your coaching anytime sooner?
Well, what I'm actually doing right now is working with a small group of people, and we're putting together a coaching/education platform.
Oh.
Where people who are co-creating can also become teachers, or they can become coaches. But it's going to be a very experiential teaching platform. It's not going to be just content related. It's going to be more along kind of like if you go to a trade school. Like instead of learning how to do plumbing, you can learn how to remote view, or you can learn how to heal, or you can learn how to become exoconscious. So it's very hands-on. It's a very hands-on type of practical education that we're going to be putting together. And the coaching groups will be part of that. But if I start another coaching group separately, I'll be doing that in September.
In September. Okay, so if people are interested in that, they can connect with you now.
Absolutely.
To see about possibly getting involved in the group in September. So Rebecca, this has been so much fun. And
Yes, for sure.
I
Thank you.
really, it's great to see you again and to
Yeah,
see all the important work that you're doing. And we hope
thank
that we
you.
can perhaps have you on again at some point.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
maybe
Maybe
after you
when we
get,
get our school up and running.
yes, you get the school up and running. I'd love to hear about that too.
Yeah.
So, well, God bless and thank you
Oh,
so
thank you,
much for the
Gwen.
work you
Thank
do
you
and
so
for
much.
being with us today. And I'm
Okay.
just gonna click off the record button here and I will say goodbye for now.
Bye, dear.